England, 1818. The grand ballroom of Marlborough House blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their flames reflected in crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floor. The cream of London society moved in elegant patterns beneath the vaulted ceiling, a kaleidoscope of silk gowns in jewel tones and gentlemen in impeccable evening attire. The orchestra played Mozart with practiced precision, each note floating through the warm air thick with perfume, beeswax and ambition. At the far edge of the ballroom, near a towering arrangement of white roses, Lady Amelia Fairmont stood alone, her gloved hands clasped loosely before her. At 24, she had long since learned the art of appearing serene while her stomach twisted with anxiety. The pale gold silk of her gown, though elegant in its simplicity, was 3 seasons old. She had altered it herself, adding new ribbon at the waist to disguise where the fabric had been let out and taken in again. Her golden hair was dressed simply, swept up with pearl pins that had belonged to her mother. "Miss Fairmont!" A familiar voice spoke at her elbow, and Amelia turned to find Lady Pembroke, a kindly widow of advancing years who had befriended her mother decades ago. "How delightful to see you here. Your mother, is she well?" Amelia managed a smile that did not quite reach her green-grey eyes. "As well as can be expected, Lady Pembroke. The physicians remain hopeful." Lady Pembroke's expression softened with sympathy that made Amelia want to weep. "Give her my regards, dear child. And your brother, young Henry. He continues at school." "For now," Amelia replied quietly, then caught herself. "Yes, thank you. He is doing quite well in his studies." Before Lady Pembroke could probe further, a stir near the ballroom entrance drew every eye. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenworth had arrived, a formidable woman of 70 years whose ramrod posture and sharp blue eyes suggested she missed nothing of importance. Behind her walked her grandson, Christopher Hale, Duke of Ravenworth. Amelia felt her breath catch despite herself. The Duke stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders accentuated by perfectly tailored black evening clothes. Dark hair, almost black in the candlelight, was swept back from a face that might have been carved from marble, all sharp aristocratic planes and that distinctive strong jaw. His eyes, a striking blue so pale they appeared almost silver, surveyed the assembled company with cool detachment. "The most eligible bachelor in England," Lady Pembroke whispered, though Amelia had not asked. "And the coldest, by all accounts. They say he has refused no fewer than 12 proposals from desperate mammas this season alone." Amelia watched as the Duke moved through the crowd, acknowledging greetings with brief nods but engaging with no one. There was something remote in his manner, as though an invisible wall separated him from the rest of humanity. She understood such walls. She had built her own. "Lady Fairmont," the Dowager Duchess's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, and Amelia realized with dawning horror that the elderly woman was bearing down upon her with clear purpose. "How fortuitous to encounter you here. I trust your dear mother is comfortable." It was not a question born of genuine concern. Amelia recognized the calculating gleam in those sharp eyes. "Your Grace is most kind to inquire," she replied, dropping into a curtsy appropriate to the Duchess's rank. "And this," the Dowager continued, gesturing imperiously to her grandson who had followed in her wake, "is my grandson, the Duke of Ravenworth. Christopher, may I present Lady Amelia Fairmont, daughter of the late Viscount Fairmont." The Duke bowed with mechanical precision. "Lady Amelia." "Your Grace," Amelia murmured, not quite meeting those unsettling pale eyes. "I believe the next dance is a waltz," the Dowager Duchess announced, as though conferring a great favour. "Christopher, you must dance with Lady Amelia. I insist upon it." A muscle tightened in the Duke's jaw, but he offered his arm with the same mechanical courtesy. "It would be my honour." Amelia placed her gloved hand upon his arm, feeling the steel beneath the fine fabric of his coat. As he led her onto the floor, she was acutely conscious of the curious glances following them. The Duke of Ravenworth, who declined to dance with even the most celebrated beauties of the season, leading the impoverished daughter of a disgraced viscount into a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, proper but impersonal. They began to move with the music, and Amelia discovered that despite his coldness, The Duke danced with flawless grace. Your grandmother is most persistent, Amelia ventured, desperate to fill the silence stretching between them. She has her reasons, the Duke replied, his tone suggesting he found those reasons distasteful. They completed another turn in silence. Amelia fixed her gaze somewhere past his shoulder, unwilling to look directly into that impassive face. You live in Surrey, I understand, he said finally, the words carrying no particular interest. Yes, Your Grace. A small property that has been in my family for 3 generations. I see. No further conversation passed between them. When the music ended, the Duke bowed with the same mechanical precision and returned her to the edge of the ballroom without another word. Amelia watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling as though she had been assessed and found wanting. Well, a voice dripping with false sweetness spoke behind her. How extraordinary. Amelia turned to find Lady Beatrix Wesley, regarding her with barely concealed disdain. At 22, Lady Beatrix was acknowledged as one of the season's greatest beauties, with dark hair and striking features that turned heads wherever she went. She was also widely understood to have set her cap at the Duke of Ravenworth. Lady Beatrix, Amelia acknowledged quietly, I cannot imagine what possessed the Dowager Duchess to foist you upon her grandson, Lady Beatrix continued, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the nearby clusters of guests. Surely she must know that the Duke would never seriously consider someone in your circumstances. Amelia felt heat rising in her cheeks but maintained her composure. I am certain the Dowager Duchess was merely being kind. Kind? Lady Beatrix laughed, a brittle sound. My dear Miss Fairmont, everyone knows your family is one step from debtor's prison. Your father squandered the estate, your mother is dying, and you have nothing but a pretty face and desperate hopes to recommend you. The Duke of Ravenworth does not require pretty faces. He requires consequence, fortune, and impeccable bloodlines. Then you are admirably suited, Amelia replied quietly, proud that her voice did not shake. If you will excuse me. She turned away, but not before seeing the satisfied smile on Lady Beatrix's face. The humiliation burned, all the worse because the words contained more truth than falsehood. Amelia moved through the crowded ballroom, seeking escape from the curious glances and whispered speculation. The Marlborough Library offered sanctuary. Amelia slipped inside, closing the door behind her and leaning against it with relief. The room was blessedly empty, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes and smelling of old paper and beeswax. A fire burned low in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the Turkish carpet. Amelia moved to one of the window seats, drawing the heavy curtain partially closed. She needed only a few moments to compose herself before returning to the ballroom. Her mother's illness required expensive treatment they could barely afford. Her brother's school fees were 3 months overdue. The small property in Surrey that was all that remained of her father's estate was mortgaged to its full value. She had come to London for the season with one purpose, to find a husband wealthy enough to save her family from ruin. It was a mercenary goal that made her stomach turn, but what choice did she have? Henry was only 16, brilliant and kind, deserving of the education that would secure his future. Her mother needed specialists and medicines that cost more than the quarterly rents of their remaining tenants. The library door opened suddenly, and Amelia shrank further behind the curtain as voices entered the room. This is unconscionable, grandmother. The Duke's voice, cold and clipped. I will not be manipulated into marriage. Do not be dramatic, Christopher. The Dowager Duchess's tone was sharp. All I ask is that you consider suitable candidates. Lady Amelia Fairmont is perfectly acceptable. Acceptable. The Duke laughed bitterly. She is a fortune hunter, barely better than a beggar. Her family is drowning in debt. Her father was a fool who squandered everything. And she is here trolling for a wealthy husband to save her from ruin. Which makes her ideal, the Dowager countered. She is desperate enough to be malleable, well-bred enough to be received, and pretty enough not to embarrass you. More importantly, she would be grateful for the match and unlikely to make emotional demands. Amelia pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. You mistake me, grandmother, the Duke said. his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I said I would consider marriage when I was ready. I did not say I would shackle myself to the first desperate woman you parade before me. Marry her. I would rather die than tie myself to someone whose sole virtue is her need." "Christopher, you are being unreasonable." "I am being honest. Now, if you will excuse me, I have endured quite enough of this tiresome gathering." The door opened and closed. Amelia remained frozen behind the curtain, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the Dowager Duchess must hear it. After a moment, the elderly woman sighed and departed as well. Only then did Amelia emerge, her legs unsteady. She caught sight of her reflection in the window glass, pale and stricken. The Duke's words echoed in her mind, each one a precise cut. Fortune hunter, beggar, desperate, malleable. He was not wrong. That was the most painful part. She was here trolling for a wealthy husband. She did need saving. But to hear herself described with such contempt, such utter dismissal of her humanity, was devastating. Amelia straightened her shoulders, smoothing her gown with trembling hands. She would return to the ballroom for precisely as long as propriety demanded. Then she would leave. She had her pride, even if she had little else. The ballroom seemed brighter and louder when she rejoined it, the laughter more shrill, the music more discordant. She moved through the remainder of the evening in a daze, accepting congratulations on having danced with the Duke with a frozen smile, deflecting questions about whether he had shown particular interest with practiced vagueness. When she finally made her excuses, pleading a headache that was no fabrication, Lady Pembroke looked concerned. "Shall I send for your carriage, dear?" "I would be most grateful," Amelia replied. The cool night air was a mercy after the stifling ballroom. Amelia drew her shawl tighter as she waited for her modest hired carriage to be brought around. Around her, grander equipages collected their noble passengers. Footmen in elaborate liveries attending to ladies in furs worth more than Amelia's entire wardrobe. She climbed into the shabby interior of her carriage, gave the direction to her rented lodgings in an unfashionable quarter of the city, and finally allowed herself to weep. The morning after the Marlborough Ball dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of persistent rain that turned London's streets into rivers of mud and kept all but the most determined indoors. Amelia sat in the cramped drawing room of her rented lodgings, staring at the letter that had arrived with the morning post. The physician's handwriting was precise and unforgiving in its clarity. "He recommends Bath," Amelia said quietly, looking up at her mother's companion, Mrs. Davies, a widow who had served the Fairmont family for 20 years. "He says without the waters and specialized treatment there, Mamma will not survive the winter." Mrs. Davies's weathered face creased with concern. "And the cost?" Amelia folded the letter with trembling fingers. "More than we have. Considerably more." She rose and moved to the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. Behind her, she could hear Mrs. Davies's sharp intake of breath as the older woman absorbed the implications. "There must be something we can do," Mrs. Davies said finally. "Perhaps if we wrote to your mother's cousin in—" "There is no one left to write to," Amelia interrupted gently. "We have exhausted every possibility, called upon every connection. The well is dry, Mrs. Davies." A knock at the door preceded the entrance of their single maidservant, a girl of perhaps 14 who served as cook, housemaid and lady's maid all in one. "Begging your pardon, miss, but there's a gentleman calling. Says his name is Lord Edmund Carlisle." Amelia turned from the window in surprise. Lord Edmund Carlisle was the Duke of Ravensworth's cousin, a man of perhaps 29, with a quiet manner and kind eyes. She had been introduced to him briefly during her first week in London. "Show him to the drawing room, please." Lord Edmund entered a few minutes later, his greatcoat damp from the rain. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense, his features too irregular, his frame too slight, but there was something reassuring in his steady gaze. "Lady Amelia," he greeted her with a bow. "Forgive the impropriety of calling unannounced. I heard you had departed the Marlborough Ball early last evening and wished to ensure you were well." "That is most thoughtful, Lord Edmund," Amelia replied, gesturing for him to sit. "I suffered merely a headache, nothing of consequence." Lord Edmund settled into the worn chair, his expression grave. "I wonder if I might speak plainly with you, Lady Amelia. What I have to say may seem forward, but I hope you will hear me out." Amelia felt a flutter of apprehension. "Of course, I am aware of your family's circumstances," he began without preamble. "The debts left by your father, your mother's illness, your brother's education. Please do not take offence. In London society, such matters become common knowledge despite our best efforts at discretion." Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks, but she held his gaze. "I see. I also know," Lord Edmund continued, "that you came to London this season with the hope of finding a suitable match, a practical arrangement that might alleviate your family's financial distress. You are remarkably direct, my lord. I find that directness saves considerable time and misunderstanding." He leaned forward slightly. "I am in need of a wife, Lady Amelia. Not for any romantic notion, but because my own family has made it clear that my continued bachelorhood is unacceptable. I am the last of my immediate Carlisle line, and they demand heirs." Amelia blinked, unsure where this conversation was leading. "I propose a practical arrangement," Lord Edmund said. "I would like to court you formally, with an understanding that we would marry within the year. I am not wealthy by the standards of men like my cousin, but I have sufficient means to settle your family's debts and provide for your mother's treatment." The room seemed to tilt. Amelia gripped the arm of her chair. "Lord Edmund, I hardly know what to say." "Say nothing yet," he advised. "Consider my offer carefully. I require only honesty and companionship from a wife. I do not expect grand passion or romantic declarations. You would have your own household, your own independence within the bounds of propriety. Your family would be secure." "Why me?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lord Edmund smiled faintly. "Because you are sensible and kind. Because you do not simper or dissemble. Because I believe we could deal well together, you and I, without the complications of heightened emotions. You speak of marriage as a business arrangement. Is that not what it is for people of our station?" He tilted his head. "I am offering you security, Lady Amelia. In return, I ask for a partner who will manage my household with competence and grace. It seems an equitable exchange." Amelia thought of her mother, growing weaker with each passing day. Of Henry, brilliant Henry, who might have to abandon his studies and take work as a clerk or tutor. Of the small property in Surrey that had been in her family for 3 generations, about to be seized by creditors. "If I were to accept," she said slowly, "what would you require of me?" "Public announcement of our courtship," Lord Edmund replied. "Attendance at appropriate social functions as my intended. Propriety in all things, naturally. The wedding itself could take place at your convenience, though I would hope for something within 6 months. And my family's debts. The most pressing creditors would be paid immediately as a gesture of my serious intentions," he said. "Those threatening legal action or seizure of property. Upon our marriage, the remainder would be settled in full. Your mother's treatment would be funded from that point forward." It was more than Amelia had dared hope for. More than she deserved, given that she could offer Lord Edmund nothing but a tarnished name and failing connections. "You are extraordinarily generous, my lord." "I am extraordinarily practical," he corrected. "You possess the qualities I value in a wife. I possess the means you require for your family's survival. It is simply a matter of mutual benefit." Amelia rose and moved to the window again, her mind racing. She had come to London prepared to accept whatever offer might save her family, had steeled herself to marry even someone disagreeable if necessity demanded it. Lord Edmund was neither disagreeable nor unkind. He was offering her exactly what she needed, with clear terms and no false pretenses of affection. "I accept," she said, turning back to face him. "I accept your courtship with the understanding that it will lead to marriage." Lord Edmund stood, relief evident in his expression. "You honour me, Lady Amelia. I will visit my solicitor this afternoon to arrange payment of your most urgent debts. Within the week, they will be settled." After he departed, Amelia remained standing in the drawing room, feeling as though she had just signed away her life. Yet what choice had she possessed? At least Lord Edmund was honest. He did not pretend to love her or promise things he could not deliver. There was a mercy in that honesty, bitter though it tasted. The rain continued throughout the day. By evening, Amelia had written to Henry at school, informing him that their circumstances would soon improve. She wrote to the physician in Bath, inquiring about treatment facilities and costs. She wrote to the estate agent in Surrey, instructing him to inform the creditors that payment would be forthcoming. She did not write to anyone about the Duke of Ravenworth's cruel words, or about how they echoed in her mind with each stroke of her pen. Fortune hunter. Beggar. Desperate. Perhaps he had been right after all. Perhaps that was exactly what she had become. 3 days later, Lord Edmund called again to inform her that the creditors holding mortgages on the Surrey property had been paid in full, and that arrangements for Lady Margaret's transfer to Bath were underway. He presented these facts with the same calm efficiency he might use to discuss the weather. "I have also taken the liberty of settling your brother's school fees for the remainder of the year," he added. "Young men should not have their education disrupted by financial uncertainties." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "You are too kind, my lord. I am invested in your family's well-being," he replied. "They are soon to be my family as well." The following week, Lord Edmund escorted her to a small gathering at Lady Pembroke's townhouse. The announcement of their courtship had been made in the society pages that morning, generating considerable surprise and speculation. Amelia endured the curious glances and carefully worded congratulations with what grace she could muster. She did not see the Duke of Ravenworth at any of these gatherings. According to Lord Edmund, his cousin had departed London for his estates in Kent shortly after the Marlborough ball, claiming pressing business matters that required his attention. "Christopher has never been one for society," Lord Edmund remarked as they took a turn about Lady Pembroke's gardens. "He finds such gatherings tedious." "He made that abundantly clear," Amelia murmured before she could stop herself. Lord Edmund glanced at her curiously. "Did he offend you in some manner?" "Christopher can be brusque, but he means no genuine harm." "He was perfectly civil," Amelia lied, unwilling to explain what she had overheard in the Marlborough library. "We exchanged perhaps a dozen words in total." "That sounds like Christopher." Lord Edmund smiled faintly. "My cousin has built walls around himself so high that few can scale them. I sometimes wonder if he is even aware of it." Amelia said nothing, but in her heart she knew exactly how aware the Duke of Ravenworth was of those walls. He had constructed them deliberately, stone by stone, and he wielded them as weapons against anyone who dared approach too close. Let him keep his walls, she thought fiercely. She had secured her own future and her family's survival. The Duke of Ravenworth and his contempt could trouble her no more. 5 weeks had passed since the Marlborough ball, and Christopher Hale found himself standing in the stable yard of his Kent estate, watching his steward point to various outbuildings in need of repair. It was the waning end of September, the hedgerows still heavy from the month's rains, and the quiet of Kent felt like reprieve after London's crush. The journey from London had taken the better part of a day, and the autumn air here in the countryside carried a crispness absent from the city's perpetual fog and coal smoke. "The tenant cottages require new roofs before winter sets in properly, Your Grace," Mr. Thorpe was saying, gesturing toward the distant row of whitewashed buildings. "And the eastern fence line needs reinforcement where the stream overflowed during the September rains." Christopher nodded absently, his attention only half focused on his steward's recitation of necessary repairs. The past weeks in London had been suffocating, filled with his grandmother's pointed remarks about suitable matches and the endless parade of hopeful mamas presenting their daughters at every social function. He had fled to Kent with the excuse of estate business, but in truth, he simply needed distance from the marriage market and its attendant pressures. "I shall inspect the cottages myself tomorrow," Christopher said. "For now I require a ride. Has Thunder been exercised today?" "Not yet, Your Grace. Shall I have him saddled?" "No need. I will see to it myself." An hour later, Christopher rode through the narrow lanes that wound between his property and the nearby village of Ashford. The countryside wore its autumn colours brilliantly, the trees aflame with gold and crimson, the hedgerows heavy with blackberries and rosehips. It was the kind of day that demanded solitude and reflection, and Christopher found himself grateful for the escape. The village of Ashford was small but prosperous, its main street lined with well-kept shops and a modest church, whose bells were ringing the hour as Christopher passed. He had no particular destination in mind, merely the desire to ride until his restless thoughts settled. He guided Thunder past the baker's shop, the chandler's, and the general store, nodding to villagers who recognized him and offered respectful greetings. It was pure chance that led him down the narrow lane beside the church, where a weathered sign announced St. Catherine's Home for foundling children. The building itself was a converted manor house, its stone walls softened by climbing ivy, and its windows bright with lamplight despite the afternoon sun. A small garden stretched behind it, and it was there that Christopher's attention was arrested by a scene that made him rein in his horse. A woman in a simple dove-grey dress knelt in the grass beside a young girl of perhaps 6 or 7 years. Even from a distance, Christopher recognized the golden hair visible beneath her modest bonnet. Lady Amelia Fairmont was reading aloud from a book, her voice carrying faintly on the breeze, while the child leaned against her shoulder with obvious contentment. Christopher dismounted, tying Thunder to a nearby post, and moved closer without conscious thought. He positioned himself behind a large oak tree where he could observe without being seen, telling himself he was merely curious about what brought the desperate fortune hunter to a foundling home in Kent. And the princess discovered that kindness was a magic far more powerful than any spell, Amelia read, her voice gentle and warm, for it could transform not only others, but oneself as well. The child sighed contentedly. I wish I could read as prettily as you, Miss Amelia. You will, darling. We shall practice together, shall we not? Now run along and tell Mrs. Hutchins that the afternoon reading is finished. The girl scampered away toward the house, leaving Amelia alone in the garden. She remained kneeling for a moment, her hand resting on the grass as though gathering strength, and Christopher saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. When she stood, there was a weariness in her movements that spoke of more than physical fatigue. Other children began emerging from the house, ranging in age from perhaps 4 to 12 years old. They swarmed around Amelia with the easy affection of those who knew her well, calling her name and vying for her attention. She greeted each one by name, asked after their lessons, admired a drawing one boy showed her, and listened seriously as a girl complained about a torn stocking. Miss Amelia, a harried-looking woman, appeared in the doorway, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Young Thomas has taken ill again. I fear his fever has returned. The warmth drained from Amelia's expression, replaced by immediate concern. Where is he? In the sick room, miss. Mrs. Hutchins is with him, but she says he needs the physician. Then we shall send for Dr. Bradley at once. Amelia began walking toward the house with purpose. Begging your pardon, miss, but we cannot afford Dr. Bradley's fees at present. The last illness emptied what remained of our medical fund. Amelia stopped, her hand going to the small reticule at her waist. She opened it and withdrew a handful of coins, pressing them into the woman's hand. This should be sufficient for Dr. Bradley's visit and any medicines Thomas requires. Please send for him immediately. But miss, this is far too much. We cannot accept. You can and you will, Amelia said firmly but kindly. Thomas needs care and he shall have it. That is the end of the matter. Christopher watched as the woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. He watched as Amelia hurried inside, presumably to sit with the sick child until the physician arrived. He watched as the other children dispersed reluctantly, returning to their various activities with frequent glances toward the house where their beloved Miss Amelia had disappeared. After a long moment, Christopher tied Thunder more securely and approached the building. He entered through the side door, finding himself in a corridor that smelled of baking bread and carbolic soap. Voices drifted from a nearby room, and he followed them to what appeared to be a small office. An elderly woman sat behind a desk, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her sharp eyes assessing Christopher as he appeared in the doorway. May I help you, sir? I am Christopher Hale, he said, then added on impulse. I am interested in the work you do here. Might you tell me about St. Catherine's? The woman's expression softened marginally. I am Mrs. Hutchins, the director. We care for foundling children and orphans, providing them with shelter, education, and when possible, placement in suitable households or apprenticeships, and your funding. We rely upon the generosity of patrons and benefactors, Mrs. Hutchins replied. Though I confess, we often find ourselves stretched thin. Were it not for devoted volunteers, we could not manage at all. Volunteers, such as the lady I saw in the garden. Mrs. Hutchins's face lit with warmth. Miss Amelia. She is a blessing to us, truly. For 3 years now, she has travelled from Surrey to work with our children. She reads to them, teaches the older ones their letters, and shows them kindness they might never otherwise know. Just today, she has paid for young Thomas to see the physician. Though I know she can ill afford such generosity, Christopher felt something tighten in his chest. She comes from Surrey regularly, every fortnight when she can manage it. She stays with her aunt who lives nearby and devotes whatever time she has to our children, never seeks recognition or thanks, simply does the work and slips away quietly when it is done. Christopher thanked Mrs. Hutchins and left the building, his mind in turmoil. He rode back to his estate in a daze, seeing not the autumn countryside, but rather the image of Amelia kneeling in the grass with a book. Amelia handing over coins she could not spare. Amelia surrounded by children who loved her. Fortune hunter. Beggar. Desperate. His own words from the Marlborough Library echoed in his mind with sickening clarity. He had judged her based on circumstances and assumptions, never once considering that there might be more to her story than financial necessity. That evening, Christopher summoned his solicitor from London. Mr. Pemberton arrived 2 days later. A thin man with spectacles and an air of perpetual worry. I require information about a family, Christopher told him without preamble. The Fairmonts of Surrey. Everything you can discover about their financial circumstances, the late Viscount's business dealings, and the current state of their affairs. Mr. Pemberton departed with instructions to be thorough and discreet. 3 days later, he returned with a thick folder of documents. The story is not what one might expect, Your Grace. Mr. Pemberton began, spreading papers across Christopher's desk. The late Viscount Fairmont was indeed in debt when he died, but not through gambling or extravagance. He was the victim of fraud perpetrated by his business partner, a Mr. George Thornton. Christopher leaned forward, studying the documents. What evidence exists? Substantial evidence, Your Grace. Contracts showing money invested that was never used for the stated purposes. Bank records indicating systematic theft over a period of years. The Viscount discovered the fraud shortly before his death and gathered these proofs, but he died before he could bring charges. And why was no prosecution pursued afterward? The family lacked resources to engage proper legal representation, Mr. Pemberton explained. Mr. Thornton was wealthy and well-connected. Without adequate counsel, Lady Fairmont chose not to pursue the matter, fearing it would only lead to further financial ruin. Christopher felt anger stirring. What of the current debts? Entirely medical in nature, Your Grace. Lady Margaret Fairmont suffers from consumption and requires expensive treatment. The family has mortgaged their property to pay for physicians and medicines. The son, Henry, works as a tutor's assistant while maintaining his own studies. By all accounts, the family lives modestly and spends nothing on luxury or entertainment. Christopher sat back in his chair, the papers before him painting a picture entirely at odds with his assumptions. The Fairmonts were not profligate spendthrifts or opportunistic social climbers. They were simply unlucky, victims of betrayal and illness, struggling with dignity to survive. And he had called Lady Amelia a fortune hunter, barely better than a beggar. Is there anything else, Your Grace? Mr. Pemberton asked hesitantly. Yes, Christopher said slowly. I want you to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to bring charges against George Thornton now. And I want to know the total sum of the Fairmont family's current debts. After the solicitor departed, Christopher remained in his study, watching darkness fall over the Kent countryside. For the first time in years, perhaps since his mother's death when he was a boy, he felt the stirrings of shame. He had judged Amelia Fairmont without knowledge, without compassion, without the slightest attempt to understand her circumstances. He had reduced her to a caricature based on his own cynicism and his determination to remain emotionally untouched by the world. But she was not a caricature. She was a woman who gave what little she had to sick children. A woman who maintained her dignity while her family crumbled around her. A woman who had overheard his cruel words and said nothing, simply disappeared into the rainy London night with her pain held close. Christopher rose and moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. He did not love Lady Amelia Fairmont. Love was an emotion he had locked away long ago, too dangerous to allow. But he was intrigued by her, drawn to the contradiction between what he had assumed her to be and what she actually was, and he was responsible for causing her pain. That debt, at least, required acknowledgement and reparation. Christopher returned to London 3 days after his conversation with Mr. Pemberton, his mind filled with new understanding and an unfamiliar sense of purpose. The city seemed different now, its grey streets and coal smoke haze less oppressive than they had been weeks earlier when he fled to Kent. He had matters to address, wrongs to right, though he told himself it was merely the natural course of a gentleman correcting an error in judgment. The season's social calendar continued its relentless march, and Christopher found himself scanning the notices in the Morning Post with unprecedented attention. Lady Hartley's musical evening, Lord Pemberton's card party, the Duchess of Marlborough's autumn ball. Any of these might provide an opportunity to encounter Lady Amelia, though he was uncertain what he would say when he did. The opportunity came sooner than expected. His sister Victoria arrived at his townhouse unannounced on a grey Thursday afternoon, sweeping into his study with characteristic energy. "Christopher," she greeted him, settling into a chair without invitation. "You look dreadful. Have you been sleeping at all?" "Good afternoon to you as well, Victoria," he replied dryly. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit?" Victoria studied him with sharp eyes that missed little. At 27, she had been married for 5 years to a pleasant but unremarkable baron, and had developed an unfortunate habit of meddling in Christopher's affairs with sisterly determination. "I came to inform you that I am attending Lady Hartley's musical this evening," she said, "and I thought you might wish to accompany me." Christopher raised an eyebrow. "Since when do I attend musical evenings?" "Since you have spent the past week inquiring after Lady Amelia Fairmont's social engagements with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop," Victoria replied tartly. "Really, Christopher, did you think I would not notice? Half of London has noticed." Heat rose in Christopher's face. "I merely wish to what? Apologize for whatever terrible thing you said to her at the Marlborough ball." Victoria leaned forward. "She departed that evening pale as death, and you vanished to Kent the very next day. What happened between you?" Christopher turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the square. Rain had begun falling again, turning the cobblestones dark and slick. "Nothing of consequence. Christopher Hale, I am your sister, not a fool. Tell me what you did." The command in her voice reminded him uncomfortably of their late mother. Christopher sighed, the fight draining from him. "I overheard my grandmother attempting to manipulate me into considering Lady Amelia as a potential bride. I responded with considerable hostility, calling her a fortune hunter and worse. I did not know Lady Amelia was in the adjacent room and heard every word." Victoria's expression shifted from curiosity to horror. "Christopher, you did not." "I did." He met her gaze squarely. "I judged her based on circumstances I did not understand and assumptions I had no right to make. I have since learned that I was entirely wrong in my assessment of her character. And now you wish to make amends. I wish to apologize, yes." Victoria rose and moved to stand beside him at the window. "She is being courted by Lord Edmund, you know. Your cousin. The papers carried a notice of their courtship 2 weeks ago." Something twisted in Christopher's chest, an unfamiliar sensation that felt uncomfortably close to jealousy. "Edmund is a good man. He will treat her well." "Yes, he will," Victoria agreed. "But you did not answer my question about the musical evening. Will you come?" Christopher considered refusing. What purpose would it serve to seek out Lady Amelia merely to unburden his conscience? She had moved forward with her life, secured her family's future through Edmund's courtship. His apology would change nothing and might only cause her further discomfort. Yet the image of her kneeling in the grass, reading to foundling children, haunted him. The memory of her voice, gentle and warm, refusing the money that kind woman had tried to refuse. He owed her honesty, at the very least. "I will come," he said finally. Lady Hartley's musical evening drew a respectable crowd, though not the crush of a proper ball. Christopher arrived with Victoria, scanning the assembled guests with barely concealed purpose. He spotted Lady Amelia almost immediately, standing near the pianoforte with Edmund at her side. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the colour of her eyes, and her golden hair was dressed in an elegant arrangement that made her seem older, more sophisticated than he remembered. Edmund saw Christopher first and offered a cordial nod. Christopher made his way across the room, feeling Victoria's encouraging presence beside him. "Good evening, Edmund," Christopher greeted his cousin. "Lady Amelia." Amelia's expression froze, the warmth draining from her face. She offered a curtsy of perfect propriety, but her eyes remained cold. "Your Grace, might I have the honour of speaking with you?" Christopher asked, aware that Edmund was watching with interest. "Perhaps a turn about the room?" For a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she inclined her head fractionally and placed her gloved hand on his offered arm. They moved away from Edmund and Victoria, walking slowly along the perimeter of the room where the crowd was less dense. "I owe you an apology," Christopher began without preamble, "for what I said at the Marlborough ball. You were not meant to hear those words, but that does not excuse them. I spoke from ignorance and prejudice, and I caused you pain. For that, I am profoundly sorry." Amelia's expression remained impassive. "Your Grace is kind to concern himself with such trifling matters. They were not trifling to you." "No," she agreed quietly. "They were not, but I have survived worse than the poor opinion of a duke, Your Grace. You need not trouble yourself with guilt on my account." Christopher felt the rebuke in her words, gentle though they were. "I have since learned something of your circumstances. The fraud perpetrated against your father, your work with the foundling children in Kent. I was wrong in my assessment of your character, Lady Amelia. Entirely and inexcusably wrong." "How gratifying to be reassessed and found acceptable," Amelia said. And now there was an edge to her voice. "Tell me, Your Grace, do you make a habit of judging everyone you meet so harshly? Or was I particularly deserving of your contempt?" The question struck him like a blow. Christopher stopped walking, forcing her to stop as well. "You are angry with me." "I was angry with you," Amelia corrected. "Now I am simply weary of this conversation. You have apologized. I accept your apology. We need never speak of it again." She attempted to withdraw her hand from his arm, but Christopher covered it gently with his own, holding her there. "Please, allow me to explain." "There is nothing to explain," Amelia interrupted, her voice low but fierce. "You looked at me and saw exactly what society taught you to see. A desperate woman from an impoverished family, seeking to better her circumstances through marriage. You were not wrong in your observations, Your Grace. I came to London precisely to find a wealthy husband. That is the truth of it, but not the whole truth." "No," she admitted, "not the whole truth, but enough of it to justify your disdain." She pulled her hand free, and this time he let her go. "I am to be your cousin's wife, Your Grace. I would prefer that we maintain cordial but distant relations. It will be easier for everyone." She walked away before he could respond, returning to Edmund's side with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Christopher remained where she had left him, watching as she accepted Edmund's arm and allowed herself to be led to a seat for the musical performance about to begin. Victoria appeared at his elbow. "That went well," she observed with barely concealed sarcasm. "She will not forgive me." "Can you blame her?" Victoria asked. "Christopher, whatever you said to her must have been truly dreadful. She looks at you as though you were something dangerous." Christopher did not attend the musical performance. He left Lady Hartley's townhouse and walked through the rain-slicked streets of London, his mind in turmoil. He had expected Lady Amelia to accept his apology with grace, perhaps even to soften toward him. Instead, she had held herself distant and cold, making it abundantly clear that she wanted nothing from him, not even his contrition. In the days that followed, every attempt Christopher made to convey his remorse, flowers discreetly redirected to a parish, unannounced calls declined, and the odd musical evening shadowed from a distance only tightened the distance Amelia kept. It was Victoria who finally intervened, appearing at his townhouse one afternoon with determination written across her features. "This has gone on long enough," she announced. "You are making yourself ridiculous, and more importantly, you are making Lady Amelia uncomfortable. She has asked Edmund to take her away from London for a time, claiming she needs to visit her mother in Bath." Christopher felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She is leaving because of you," Victoria said bluntly. "Your continued pursuit is distressing her." "Christopher, what are you trying to accomplish?" "You apologized. She accepted. That should have been the end of it." "I do not know," Christopher admitted, the words torn from him. "I only know that I cannot seem to leave it alone. I see her face, Victoria. I hear my own words echoing back at me. I need her to understand that I was wrong." Victoria studied him for a long moment. "This is not just about guilt, is it?" Christopher turned away, unable to meet his sister's knowing gaze. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Victoria moved closer, her voice gentler now. "Christopher, are you developing feelings for Lady Amelia?" The question hung in the air between them, terrible and unavoidable. Christopher wanted to deny it, to dismiss the notion as absurd. But standing there in his study, with rain pattering against the windows, he found he could not. "She is engaged to Edmund," he said finally. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters." Christopher met his sister's eyes at last. "Whatever I may or may not feel is irrelevant. Lady Amelia has made her choice, and I will not interfere with her happiness. She deserves better than my complicated emotions and troubled conscience." Victoria sighed. "Then you must stop this pursuit, Christopher. Let her go. Let her marry Edmund and build a life free from your guilt and your presence." Christopher nodded, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. "You are right. Of course you are right." But that night, alone in his study, with only brandy for company, Christopher allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding. Somewhere between seeing Amelia in that garden with foundling children and watching her walk away from him at Lady Hartley's musical, something had shifted inside him. The guilt remained, yes, but beneath it lay something else. Admiration. Fascination. The beginnings of feelings he had sworn never to allow himself again. He was falling for Lady Amelia Fairmont, the woman he had wronged so grievously, the woman who would soon be his cousin's wife, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. 10 weeks had passed since the Marlborough Ball, and London society had moved into the quieter weeks of late autumn, when the most fashionable families began departing for their country estates. Yet the announcement that appeared in the Morning Post on a crisp November morning caused a stir of interest that would have been remarkable even at the height of the season. The betrothal is announced between Lord Edmund Carlisle, son of the late Viscount Carlisle, and Lady Amelia Fairmont, daughter of the late Viscount Fairmont. The marriage is expected to take place in the spring. Christopher read the announcement 3 times, each reading bringing a different sensation. First, shock. Then, something that felt uncomfortably like grief. Finally, a hollow acceptance that settled in his chest with the weight of stone. She was lost to him. Not that she had ever been his to lose, but the finality of seeing her name linked with Edmund's in black and white made it undeniably real. Lady Amelia Fairmont would become Lady Amelia Carlisle, his cousin's wife, forever beyond his reach. He set down the newspaper and stared out the window of his study at the grey London morning. Somewhere in this city, Amelia was perhaps reading the same announcement, preparing herself for a future as Edmund's wife. A practical arrangement, she had called it during their brief conversation at Lady Hartley's musical. No grand passion or romantic declarations, only security and companionship. It was exactly what Christopher had once claimed to want for himself, before he had watched her read to foundling children and realized that some women possessed depths that rendered such calculations meaningless. The days following the announcement passed in a haze. Christopher attended functions he would normally have avoided, searching crowds for a glimpse of golden hair and green-grey eyes. When he did see Amelia, she was always at Edmund's side, smiling and gracious, every inch the future Lady Carlisle. It was at Lady Pemberton's card party that the first whispers began. Christopher arrived late, having spent the earlier part of the evening reviewing contracts with his man of business. The drawing room was filled with small tables where guests played whist and piquet, the air thick with conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. He spotted Amelia immediately, seated at a table with Edmund and two other guests. Lady Beatrix Wesley stood near the refreshment table, surrounded by a cluster of young ladies who hung upon her every word. As Christopher passed, he heard Beatrix's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. "Of course, one must admire Miss Fairmont's determination," Beatrix was saying. "To engineer such an advantageous match despite her circumstances takes considerable skill." One of the other ladies tittered nervously. "What do you mean, Lady Beatrix?" "Only that she was remarkably clever at the Marlborough ball," Beatrix continued, her tone dripping false innocence, positioning herself where the Duke and his grandmother would have that particular conversation about her prospects. Some might call it fortunate timing. Others might wonder if she arranged the entire encounter. Christopher felt anger flash hot through his veins. He took a step toward the group, but a hand on his arm stopped him. Victoria had appeared at his side. "Do not make a scene," she hissed. "Not here. She is spreading lies about Amelia." "I know, and confronting Beatrix publicly will only make matters worse." Victoria's grip tightened. "Trust me, Christopher. This requires a more careful approach." But the damage had already begun. Over the following days, the whispers multiplied and spread. Christopher heard variations of the story wherever he went. Lady Amelia had deliberately positioned herself to overhear private conversations. She had manipulated the Duke's grandmother into making that introduction. She had calculated every move with mercenary precision. The fact that Beatrix's version of events was impossible, that Christopher knew beyond doubt that Amelia had been hiding in the library to escape Beatrix herself, mattered not at all. Society loved scandal, and a fortune hunter exposed was delicious gossip. Christopher watched from a distance as the whispers began to affect Edmund's family. The Carlyles were an old family, proud of their name and careful about associations. Edmund's aunt, Lady Margaret Carlyle, a formidable widow who wielded considerable influence within the family, made her displeasure known through pointed absences and withdrawn invitations. Edmund himself remained loyal, but Christopher could see the strain it placed upon him. At the Duke of Montrose's autumn ball, Edmund stood beside Amelia with visible tension in his shoulders, as acquaintances who had previously been warm grew suddenly distant. Amelia bore it with remarkable grace, her expression serene even as ladies who had welcomed her weeks earlier now turned away with barely concealed disdain. But Christopher saw the cost in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching. He could bear it no longer. The opportunity came at Lady Windermere's gathering, a smaller affair, but one attended by most of the significant figures in London society. Christopher arrived early and positioned himself near the ballroom entrance, knowing that Beatrix never missed an opportunity to make an entrance. She swept in precisely at 9 o'clock, resplendent in emerald silk that matched her eyes, a satisfied smile playing about her lips. Christopher intercepted her before she could disappear into the crowd. "Lady Beatrix," he said, offering his arm with cold courtesy. "Might I have a word?" Beatrix's eyes widened with surprise and poorly concealed triumph. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honour." He led her to the centre of the ballroom, where the crowd parted automatically before the Duke of Ravenworth. Christopher was acutely aware of the silence spreading outward as guests realised something significant was occurring. "I understand you have been sharing an interesting story about Lady Amelia Fairmont," Christopher said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "About events at the Marlborough ball several weeks ago." Beatrix's smile faltered. "I merely repeated what others have observed, Your Grace." "Then allow me to correct those observations with facts," Christopher replied. "On the evening in question, I sought privacy in the Marlborough Library to escape the crowds. I did not know Lady Amelia was present. She had taken refuge there for reasons of her own. The conversation between myself and my grandmother occurred entirely without Lady Amelia's knowledge or planning." Beatrix's face had gone pale. "Your Grace, I did not mean to suggest." "You suggested precisely what you intended," Christopher interrupted, his voice hardening. You spread lies designed to damage Lady Amelia's reputation because you were angry that I showed her the courtesy of a single dance. Your jealousy has led you to commit slander against a woman of impeccable character. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Christopher was aware of Amelia standing frozen near the far wall, Edmund at her side, both staring at him with expressions of shock. Lady Amelia Fairmont is a woman of honour and dignity, Christopher continued, addressing not just Beatrix, but the entire assembled company. I have had occasion to learn something of her circumstances and her character. She manages her family's difficulties with grace. She devotes her time to charity work that brings her no social advantage. She possesses more genuine nobility in her character than half the titled nobility in this room. He turned his cold gaze on Beatrix. If I hear that you have continued to spread malicious gossip about Lady Amelia, I will ensure that every door in London society closes to you. Do I make myself clear? Beatrix managed a jerky nod, tears of humiliation beginning to stream down her face. She fled the ballroom, leaving a wake of shocked whispers behind her. Christopher scanned the crowd until his eyes found Amelia's. For a moment, their gazes locked across the room, and he saw in her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, anger, and something that might have been despair. Then she turned and walked swiftly toward the terrace doors, disappearing into the night. Christopher followed, ignoring Victoria's urgent call behind him. He found Amelia on the darkened terrace, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with tension. Lady Amelia, he began. She whirled to face him, her eyes blazing. What were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you have just done? I defended your honour. You made me the centre of scandal yet again. Amelia's voice shook with barely controlled fury. You stood before all of London society and drew attention to the very rumours you claimed to refute. Now, instead of wondering if I manipulated you, they will wonder why you defended me so publicly. They will speculate about your interest in your cousin's betrothed. You have made everything infinitely worse. Christopher felt as though she had struck him. I only wished to help. I did not ask for your help, Amelia cut him off. I did not want your intervention. I was managing the situation with Edmund's support, allowing the gossip to die naturally, but you could not leave well enough alone. You had to play the hero, salve your conscience, make grand gestures without considering the consequences of allowing lies to stand, the consequences of association with you. Amelia's composure finally cracked. Do you not understand? Every time you involve yourself in my affairs, you make my position more precarious. Edmund's family already questioned our match. Now they will wonder if there is truth to speculation about your interest. They will question Edmund's judgment in marrying a woman who attracts such attention from his cousin. Christopher opened his mouth to protest, but Amelia held up her hand. Please, she said, her voice dropping to exhausted resignation. Please, Your Grace, leave me alone. You have apologized for your cruel words. I have accepted that apology. We are even, but I cannot bear any more of your attempts at redemption. My family's survival depends upon this marriage to Edmund. Do not destroy that for the sake of your guilty conscience. It is not guilt, Christopher said, before he could stop himself. Amelia stared at him. What? It is not merely guilt that drives me, he admitted, the words tearing from him. These past weeks, learning about who you truly are, watching you bear society's cruelties with such grace. I have come to... He stopped, seeing the horror dawning in her eyes. No, Amelia whispered. Do not say it. Whatever you think you feel, it does not matter. I am engaged to Lord Edmund. That cannot change. I know, I am not asking you to break your engagement. I am only trying to explain. I do not want your explanations, Amelia interrupted. I want you to leave me in peace. Go back to Kent, Your Grace. Find some other object for your complicated emotions. But leave me to build the life I have chosen. She brushed past him, returning to the ballroom before he could respond. Christopher remained on the terrace, gripping the stone balustrade as though it were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted beneath his feet. He had thought to save her. Instead, he had endangered the very security she desperately needed. And in doing so, He had revealed feelings that should have remained locked safely behind the walls he had spent years constructing. 3 months had passed since the Marlborough Ball, and winter had descended upon London with unusual severity. The city lay wrapped in fog so thick that lamps burned at midday, and the cold seeped through even the finest houses, settling into bones and lungs with equal determination. In the small rented lodgings that housed what remained of the Fairmont family, Amelia sat beside her mother's bed and watched Lady Margaret struggle for each breath. The physician had left an hour earlier, his expression grave, his words brutally honest. "A matter of weeks, Lady Amelia," Dr. Harrison had said, pulling her aside into the narrow hallway. "Perhaps less. The treatments we have been providing are no longer sufficient. She requires specialized care, a facility with experience in consumptive cases, but such establishments are costly and without—" He had not needed to finish the sentence. Without funds, Lady Margaret Fairmont would die in this cramped room, gasping for air that would not come, far from the home she had loved and the life she had known. The letter from Lord Edmund had arrived that same morning. Amelia had read it 3 times, each reading confirming what she had known was inevitable since Christopher's disastrous intervention at Lady Windermere's gathering. "My dear Lady Amelia." The letter began in Edmund's careful hand. "It is with profound regret that I must inform you of circumstances beyond my control, which necessitate a revision of our understanding. My family, in light of recent speculation and the unresolved nature of certain rumours, have made their position abundantly clear. They will not countenance a marriage that brings such attention and controversy to the Carlyle name. I have fought this decision with every argument at my disposal, but I find myself without the means to oppose the combined will of my relations. My aunt controls the purse strings of the family, and she has threatened to withdraw all support should I proceed with our betrothal. I am deeply sorry, Amelia. You deserved far better than this cowardice disguised as family duty. I wish you every happiness and hope that you might find it with someone more worthy than I have proven to be." Amelia had not wept when she read it. She had moved past tears to a numb acceptance that felt almost peaceful in its finality. She had tried. She had done everything within her power to secure her family's future. It had not been enough. Mrs. Davies appeared in the doorway, her weathered face creased with worry. "Miss Amelia, young Henry is here. Shall I send him up?" "Please." Her brother burst into the room moments later, still wearing his school uniform, his face flushed from the cold, and his eyes bright with tears he was fighting to contain. At 16, Henry stood nearly as tall as a man, but in that moment, he looked like the frightened boy he had been when their father died. "The school sent word that I need to return to Surrey," he said, without preamble. "The fees are 3 months overdue, and they will not permit me to continue unless payment is made immediately." Amelia closed her eyes briefly. Of course. Edmund had been paying Henry's school fees as part of their arrangement. With the betrothal dissolved, those payments had ceased. "Then you will come home," she said, keeping her voice steady. "There is work to be found in the village. Mr. Thornton at the general store mentioned he needed help with accounts." "I should abandon school entirely," Henry said fiercely. "Take permanent work. Send the money for Mama's treatment." "No." Amelia rose and gripped her brother's shoulders. "You will not sacrifice your future. You are brilliant, Henry. You have an opportunity for university, for a career that could lift you beyond the circumstances that have trapped our family. I will not allow you to throw that away. Then what will we do?" Henry's voice cracked. "Mama is dying, Amelia. The doctor said she needs care we cannot afford. The creditors are threatening to seize the Surrey property. We have nothing left." Amelia had no answer for him. She simply pulled him into an embrace, feeling his shoulders shake with the sobs he had been holding back. Over his head, she could see their mother sleeping fitfully, each breath a laboured rasp that spoke of time running out. The knock at the front door came as the winter afternoon was fading into early darkness. Amelia descended the narrow stairs to find Lady Victoria on the doorstep, elegantly dressed, but with worry evident in her expression. "Victoria," Amelia greeted her with surprise. "I did not expect you. May I come in? I have something urgent to discuss." They settled in the small parlour, barely large enough for 2 chairs and a table. Victoria did not waste time with pleasantries. "My brother knows about Edmund's withdrawal," she said bluntly. "He knows about your mother's condition. Amelia, he wishes to help." Amelia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "No, you have not heard what he offers. It does not matter what he offers," Amelia replied, keeping her voice low but firm. "I will not accept charity from the Duke of Ravenworth. He has done quite enough already." Victoria leaned forward. "This is not about Christopher's guilt or his need for redemption. Your mother is dying, Amelia. Are you truly prepared to let pride prevent you from accepting help that could save her life?" "It is not pride," Amelia said, though they both knew that was not entirely true. "It is self-preservation. Every time your brother involves himself in my affairs, my circumstances grow worse. I cannot afford any more of his assistance." "Then what will you do?" Amelia looked down at her hands. "I have a few pieces of my grandmother's jewellery. They should fetch enough to settle the most pressing debts and perhaps buy us a few more months. After that—" She trailed off, unable to voice the inevitable conclusion. "That is not a solution, and you know it." Victoria stood. "Christopher will call on you this evening. Please, Amelia, at least hear what he has to say." After Victoria departed, Amelia sat alone in the gathering darkness. She knew she should refuse to receive the Duke. She should send word that she was not at home, that he should never call again. But the sound of her mother's laboured breathing from the room above, the memory of Henry's desperate face, the weight of responsibility pressing down upon her shoulders, all conspired to keep her seated in that cold parlour, waiting. Christopher arrived as the church bells were striking 7. He looked different than she remembered. His face thinner, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting he had not been sleeping well. He removed his hat as he entered, holding it in hands that were not quite steady. "Lady Amelia," he greeted her quietly. "Thank you for receiving me." "Victoria gave me little choice," Amelia replied, not inviting him to sit. "What is it you wish to say, Your Grace?" Christopher stood before her, this powerful duke who commanded such respect and fear in London's ballrooms, and for a moment seemed at a loss for words. Then he took a breath and spoke with devastating directness. "Your mother is dying. Your brother may lose his education. Your family faces ruin. I have the means to prevent all of this, and I am asking you to allow me to help. I cannot accept charity from you." "It would not be charity," Christopher said. "I would ask nothing in return, require no obligation, expect no gratitude. Simply permit me to pay for your mother's treatment at the best facility in Bath, to settle the debts that threaten your property, to ensure Henry can complete his education." Amelia shook her head. "You speak of asking nothing, but we both know that accepting such generosity would bind me to you more surely than any legal contract. I would spend the rest of my life knowing that my family survived only because of your intervention. That is too high a price, Your Grace." Even if the alternative is your mother's death, the brutal question hung between them. Amelia felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You presume to understand my choices," she said, her voice shaking now. "You, who have never wanted for anything, who commands wealth beyond most people's imagining. How dare you stand in my parlour and judge me for refusing to become your dependent?" "I am not judging you," Christopher said. And suddenly he was moving, crossing the small room to kneel before her chair. The gesture was so unexpected that Amelia drew back, startled. "I am begging you, not as a duke, not as someone seeking to salve his conscience, but as a man who has come to care for you more than he ever thought possible." Amelia stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "These past weeks," Christopher continued, his voice rough with emotion, "watching you bear society's cruelties with such grace, learning about the work you do, the sacrifices you make, I have been forced to acknowledge something I never wanted to feel. I care for you, Amelia, deeply. The thought of you suffering when I have the means to prevent it is unbearable." "Stop," Amelia whispered. "Please stop." "I know I have no right to these feelings," Christopher pressed on. "I know I destroyed any possibility between us with my cruel words and my interference. But I cannot stand aside and watch you lose everything when I could prevent it. Let me help, not because you owe me anything, not because I seek to bind you to me, but because allowing your family to suffer when I could save them would haunt me for the rest of my life. Amelia found her voice at last, and it came out cold and hard. You speak of caring for me, but what you truly care for is your own conscience. You wish to be the hero, to save the desperate woman, and feel noble about your generosity. But I will not be your project of redemption, your grace. I will not spend my life as an object of your charity and pity. It is not pity. Then what is it? Amelia demanded. Love. Do not insult my intelligence. You barely know me. These feelings you claim are nothing more than guilt dressed in prettier clothes. You wounded me with your words, and now you seek to heal that wound so you can feel better about yourself. But I will not be used in that way. Christopher rose from his kneeling position, his face stricken. You truly believe that is all this is? I know it is. Amelia stood as well, facing him with all the dignity she could muster. Now I must ask you to leave, your grace, and I must ask that you never return. I will find my own way forward, as I always have. Your interference, however well-intentioned, only makes matters worse. Amelia, please. Go. Her voice broke on the word. Please. Just go and leave me in peace. For a long moment, Christopher simply stood there, and Amelia saw in his face a mixture of anguish and helplessness that almost weakened her resolve. Almost. But then she remembered the cruelty of his initial judgment, the chaos his defense of her had created, the engagement she had lost because of his interference. Whatever he thought he felt, it had brought her nothing but pain. Christopher bowed stiffly and departed without another word. Amelia heard the front door close, heard his footsteps fading down the street, and only then did she sink back into her chair and allow the tears to come. Upstairs, her mother continued to struggle for breath. Her brother slept fitfully in a room barely large enough for a narrow bed. Their future remained as desperate as it had been before Christopher's visit, perhaps more so now that she had refused the one source of help available to them. But at least her pride remained intact. At least she had not become one more obligation in the Duke of Ravenworth's complicated conscience. It was cold comfort as winter closed its grip around them, and time continued its inexorable march toward loss. Christopher kept his word. After that devastating evening in Amelia's cramped parlour, he did not call again. He did not send flowers or letters. He did not appear at any social function where she might be present. To all appearances, the Duke of Ravenworth had accepted Lady Amelia's rejection and moved on with his life. But appearances could be deceiving. 3 days after their confrontation, Mr. Pemberton appeared at Christopher's London townhouse with documents that had taken weeks to assemble, evidence of fraud so comprehensive, so irrefutable, that no judge in England could ignore it. George Thornton, the man who had destroyed Viscount Fairmont's fortune, would finally face justice. File the charges, Christopher instructed, but keep my involvement anonymous. Let it appear that the Crown prosecutor discovered the evidence through routine investigation. The Fairmont family should know only that their father's name has been cleared. As you wish, Your Grace. Christopher also summoned Dr. Harrison, the physician who had been treating Lady Margaret. I understand there is a charitable foundation in Bath, Christopher began carefully, that provides treatment for consumptive patients of limited means. Dr. Harrison frowned. I am not aware of such a foundation, Your Grace. Then we shall establish one, Christopher replied. With sufficient funds to operate for the next decade, you will serve as its medical director, recommending worthy cases for admission. I trust Lady Margaret Fairmont would be among your first recommendations. Understanding dawned in the physician's eyes. Your Grace, this is most generous. This is anonymous, Christopher corrected. Lady Margaret and her family must believe she qualifies for treatment through her own merits, not through anyone's intervention. Can you arrange it? I can, Your Grace. The week that followed was a blur of meetings with solicitors, bankers, and physicians. Christopher moved through the arrangements with methodical precision, ensuring that every action could be traced back to legitimate sources that had nothing to do with the Duke of Ravenworth. The Fairmont family would be saved, but they would never know it was his doing. The news of George Thornton's arrest appeared in the newspapers 2 weeks later. Christopher read the announcement with grim satisfaction, then turned to the letter that had arrived from Henry Fairmont. "Dear Sir," the young man had written to Mr. Pemberton, addressing the solicitor, who had informed him of the legal proceedings. "I cannot express adequate gratitude for your efforts in clearing my father's name. To know that he was a victim of fraud rather than a foolish spendthrift brings profound relief to my family. Though I know not who funded this investigation, please convey our eternal thanks." Christopher folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. One debt addressed. Lady Margaret's transfer to Bath occurred with surprising swiftness. Dr. Harrison personally escorted his patient to the newly established Charitable Institute for Pulmonary Diseases, where she was installed in a bright room overlooking the healing waters. The staff, handpicked by Christopher and paid handsomely for their discretion, provided the finest care available in England. Within days, Lady Margaret's condition began to stabilize. Within weeks, she was breathing more easily than she had in months. The miraculous recovery was attributed to the superior treatments available at the Institute, and Lady Margaret herself could speak of nothing but her extraordinary good fortune in being selected for such charity. Christopher received reports of her progress through Dr. Harrison, never once suggesting he might visit. He had promised to leave Amelia in peace, and he intended to keep that promise, even if it killed him. The matter of the orphanage required more delicate handling. Christopher travelled to Surrey himself, arriving on a grey January morning when he knew Amelia would be visiting her mother in Bath. He met with Mrs. Hutchins in her cramped office, studying the ledgers that showed how desperately close to closure the institution had come. "What you need is a patron," Christopher said. "Someone who can provide steady funding without requiring public recognition." "Such benefactors are rare indeed," Mrs. Hutchins sighed. "Most who give want their names on plaques." "Then perhaps you should seek a benefactor who values discretion over recognition." Christopher withdrew a document from his coat. "This is a trust, established in my mother's name. It will provide annual funds sufficient to operate St. Catherine's for the next 5 years, with potential for renewal. The only condition is that my involvement remains confidential." Mrs. Hutchins stared at the papers with tears streaming down her weathered face. "Your Grace, I do not know what to say. Say that you will continue the work. Say that children like young Thomas will have the care they need. That is thanks enough." As he departed the orphanage, Christopher paused in the garden where he had first seen Amelia reading to the children. A small boy, perhaps 5 years old, was playing nearby with a wooden horse. The child looked up as Christopher passed. "Are you the gentleman who talks with Miss Amelia?" the boy asked with the directness of the very young. Christopher crouched down to the child's level. "I used to speak with her, yes. She seems sad lately. Mama Hutchins says it is because her mother is ill, but she was sad before that too." "Was she?" The boy nodded sagely. "I think she misses someone. Will you tell Miss Amelia that we hope her mother gets better?" "If I see her, I will tell her," Christopher promised, though he knew he would not. He had given his word to stay away, and he would honour it, no matter how much it cost him. The weeks passed slowly. Christopher received regular reports through his various intermediaries. Lady Margaret continued to improve. The charges against George Thornton were proceeding through the courts. The orphanage had announced its miraculous rescue through an anonymous patron. And Amelia, according to Victoria, who visited her regularly, was beginning to piece together the pattern. "She knows it was you," Victoria told Christopher one evening over dinner in his London townhouse. "She has not said so directly, but I can see her working through it. Her father's name cleared. Her mother in Bath receiving extraordinary care. The orphanage suddenly flush with funds. She is not a fool, Christopher. I never thought she was. What will you do when she confronts you?" "She will not confront me," Christopher replied. "I have kept my distance as she demanded. If she suspects my involvement, she can choose to accept the help or refuse it. But I will not force another conversation upon her." Victoria studied her brother's face. "You truly love her, do you not?" Christopher did not answer immediately. Love was a word he had avoided for most of his adult life, a sentiment he had deemed too dangerous to allow. But sitting there in the gathering dusk, he found he could not deny it. "Yes," he said simply. For all the good it does, either of us. In Surrey, Amelia sat in the small parlour of the family property, reading a letter from her mother that described the miraculous improvements in her health. Around her, the house felt less oppressive now that the threat of seizure had been lifted. Henry would return to school in a few weeks, his fees paid through what Dr. Harrison had vaguely described as a scholarship program. Everything was falling into place with suspicious precision. Amelia thought of Christopher's kneeling figure in this very room, his voice breaking as he begged to help. She thought of the words she had thrown at him, accusing him of seeking redemption through charity. She thought of the weeks of silence that had followed, and the steady stream of small miracles that had saved her family without any apparent connection to the Duke of Ravenworth. Actions, not words. Exactly what she had demanded of him. Lady Margaret's most recent letter lay open on Amelia's lap. My dearest daughter, her mother had written in a stronger hand than she had managed in months. You must visit as soon as you are able. There is much I wish to discuss with you about the future, and about matters of the heart that perhaps I have neglected in my focus on survival. Amelia folded the letter carefully. Her mother, who had been dying mere weeks ago, was now well enough to meddle in her daughter's romantic affairs. It would have been amusing if it were not so terrifying, because Amelia was beginning to suspect that she had made a terrible mistake, that in her determination to protect herself from further hurt, she had pushed away the one man who had proven himself willing to move mountains for her, asking nothing in return but the chance to ease her suffering. The question was whether it was too late to correct that error, or whether Christopher had finally accepted her rejection and moved on with his life, leaving her to live with the consequences of her pride. Spring arrived in England with unexpected gentleness, coaxing green shoots from the cold earth and filling the air with the scent of possibility. Amelia stood at the window of the small inn in Kent, watching rain clouds drift across the sky, and wondered if she had lost her mind entirely. It had been 3 weeks since she had made her decision, 3 weeks since her mother had looked at her with knowing eyes in that bright bath treatment room, and said, "Pride is a cold companion, my dear, far colder than admitting when one has been wrong." Lady Margaret's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The physicians attributed it to the superior treatments at the Charitable Institute. But Amelia knew better. She had pieced together the pattern of interventions, traced each seemingly coincidental blessing back to its likely source, and arrived at an inescapable conclusion. Christopher had kept his word. He had left her in peace, even while moving mountains to save everything she held dear. Now she stood in Kent, having travelled from Surrey with only her lady's maid as companion, about to do something either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. She was not certain which. The journey to Ravenworth Estate took less than an hour by hired carriage. The property revealed itself gradually as they travelled up a long, tree-lined drive. First glimpses of manicured parkland, then the house itself, a magnificent structure of honey-coloured stone that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape around it. "Wait here," Amelia instructed her maid as the carriage halted before the entrance. "I shall return shortly." The butler who answered her knock regarded her with the polite neutrality of excellent servants everywhere. "May I help you, madam?" "I am Lady Amelia Fairmont," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I wish to speak with the Duke of Ravenworth, if he is at home." Something flickered in the butler's expression, quickly masked. "His Grace is in the gardens, my lady. If you would care to follow me?" They walked through the house, and Amelia caught impressions of elegant rooms filled with light, book-lined walls, comfortable furnishings that suggested a home rather than a showplace. The butler led her through French doors onto a terrace, then gestured toward a path leading through formal gardens. "You will find His Grace by the lake, my lady." Amelia walked alone through gardens just beginning to wake from winter. Early daffodils nodded in the breeze, and somewhere nearby a bird sang with determined optimism. She found Christopher sitting on a stone bench beside a small lake, staring out at the water with an expression of such profound loneliness that her heart contracted. "Your Grace," she said quietly. He turned, and the shock on his face was almost comical. He rose immediately, his usual grace deserting him as he nearly stumbled. "Amelia," What are you doing here? Is something wrong? Your mother. My mother is well, Amelia interrupted, taking a step closer. Remarkably well, thanks to the excellent care she receives at the Charitable Institute for Pulmonary Diseases. Christopher's expression shuttered. I am glad to hear it. A charitable institute that did not exist until 3 months ago, Amelia continued. Funded by an anonymous patron who values discretion over recognition. How extraordinary. Amelia, my father's name has been cleared, she went on, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. The man who defrauded him arrested and facing trial. Henry's school fees mysteriously paid. The orphanage in Surrey saved from closure by a trust established in your mother's name. Christopher remained silent, his jaw tight. You respected my wishes, Amelia said softly. You stayed away, as I demanded. But you saved my family anyway, asking nothing in return, seeking no recognition or gratitude. You proved through actions what words could never convey. I gave you my word that I would not interfere further, Christopher replied, his voice hoarse. I kept that word. No, Amelia corrected gently. You kept the letter of your word while violating its spirit entirely. And I am profoundly grateful for that violation. She moved closer until she stood directly before him. I was wrong, Christopher. Wrong to reject your help out of pride. Wrong to dismiss your feelings as merely guilt. Wrong to push you away when you offered me exactly what I needed most. Someone willing to act on my behalf without demanding anything in return. You were protecting yourself, Christopher said. You had every right. I was afraid, Amelia interrupted. Afraid of being vulnerable again after years of simply surviving. Afraid of trusting someone who had hurt me so deeply. Afraid of feelings I did not want to acknowledge. She took a breath. I came here to tell you that I understand now. What you feel for me is not guilt. What I feel for you is not gratitude. And if the offer still stands, if you still want to know me as I truly am, then I would like to begin again. Christopher stared at her, as though she might vanish if he looked away. Amelia, are you certain? I do not want you to feel obligated. I am not obligated. I am choosing. She smiled slightly. Though I must be clear, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Trust will need to be rebuilt slowly. I will not be a passive wife who simply accepts whatever you decide. If we are to do this, it must be as equals. I would expect nothing less, Christopher said. And suddenly he was smiling too. A real smile that transformed his austere features. What are you proposing? A courtship, Amelia replied. A real one, where we spend time together without pressure of immediate commitment. Where we learn each other's minds and hearts without the weight of society's expectations crushing us. Months, perhaps, to build something genuine. Months, Christopher repeated. I can do months. He hesitated, then offered his hand. Walk with me. They walked through the gardens as spring rain began to fall, soft and warm. They talked about books and philosophy, about Christopher's childhood and Amelia's work with the orphans. They argued about the merits of Byron's poetry and laughed when they discovered they both detested formal dinner parties. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Amelia divided her time between Surrey, where she managed the family property, and Kent, where she spent increasingly frequent visits at Ravensworth. Christopher called on her in Surrey, meeting Henry and earning the young man's cautious approval. They rode together across the estate, visited the orphanage side by side, shared quiet evenings reading in the library. It was not perfect. Old wounds surfaced unexpectedly. Amelia flinched when Christopher made decisions without consulting her, a reminder of his initial high-handedness. Christopher withdrew into cold formality when he felt his emotions becoming too intense. Decades of self-protection warring with new vulnerability. But they worked through each difficulty with patient honesty. Amelia learned to voice her concerns before they festered. Christopher learned to recognize his defensive patterns and consciously choose different responses. Lady Margaret visited Ravensworth in May, pronounced herself satisfied with her daughter's choice, and extracted a promise from Christopher to treat Amelia with the respect she deserved. Henry returned to school with renewed focus, his future secure and his family's honor restored. 3 months into their courtship, On a morning when sunlight turned the lake to molten gold, Christopher and Amelia sat together on the bench where she had first found him. He took her hand, noting how naturally her fingers intertwined with his now. "I still have fears," he admitted quietly. "Fears of inadequacy, of repeating my father's coldness, of failing you when you need me most." "I know," Amelia replied. "I have fears too. But a life lived in fear is not a life worth living." Christopher reached into his coat and withdrew a small box. Inside lay a ring of simple elegance, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. "Marry me," he said. Not a command or a desperate plea, but a question offered as an equal to an equal. "Not because you need my wealth or I need redemption. Marry me because we have built something worth keeping, because I love you, Amelia, and I believe you might love me too." "I do love you," Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. "Despite everything, because of everything, yes, Christopher, I will marry you." The wedding took place the following spring in the small church near Ravenworth Estate. It was a modest affair by ducal standards, attended by family and close friends rather than the entirety of London society. Lady Margaret wept through the ceremony, healthy enough now to dance at the wedding breakfast. Henry served as groomsman, already showing signs of the scholar he would become. Victoria hugged Amelia fiercely afterward. "You have given my brother something I thought he would never have, the courage to let himself be loved." A year after their marriage, Amelia and Christopher worked together at the orphanage in Surrey, now thriving under their joint patronage. He sat on the floor with a group of children, building towers from wooden blocks and making them laugh with deliberately clumsy collapses. She organised donations with Mrs. Hutchins, planning expansions that would allow them to help even more children. Their eyes met across the busy room, and something warm and understanding passed between them. This was their partnership, built not on passion's first wild bloom, but on something deeper. Mutual respect, shared purpose, love that had grown from unlikely soil. Lady Beatrix had married a Scottish baronet and departed London society quietly. The Dowager Duchess Eleanor, in a rare moment of humility at the wedding, had admitted to Christopher that perhaps love was a better foundation for marriage than strategy after all. As evening fell and they prepared to depart the orphanage, a little girl tugged on Amelia's skirt. "Will you come back next week, Your Grace?" "We will both come back," Amelia promised, taking Christopher's hand. "We always do." They walked to their carriage together, and Christopher pulled Amelia close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happy?" he asked. "Remarkably so," she replied. "Who would have imagined? Sometimes love does not arrive in a lightning strike, but grows quietly from dark soil, nourished by patience, watered by forgiveness, reaching toward light, one tentative tendril at a time. Sometimes the cruelest words spoken in anger become the foundation for the truest connection. Once two hearts find the courage to rebuild what was broken. And sometimes, just sometimes, the man who declares he would rather die than marry becomes the man who learns that living, truly living, requires exactly that kind of union, that kind of love, that kind of grace. The end.